Alright everyone, we start off today by simply ranking the top 5 election issues within the United States between Biden and Trump. Congressional seats doesn't really matter. At least for national level seats, it's going to be roughly similar. And until a couple days ago, this list would be different. The top issue would have been arguably the riots maybe or coronavirus. Instead, the top issue right now is SCOTUS. It's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whether her seat gets replaced before the election or not, if people are happy with the replacement. Trump has decided to expedite the process. McConnell has as well. It remains to be seen whether they're going to wait until after the election and or inauguration. I think waiting at all would be a mistake, and it would be better to spend like a couple weeks vetting and then have a vote. For the Republicans, I mean. For the Democrats, the problem with obstructing is that it is still a lengthy enough period of time. It would be odd if they attempted to delay after inauguration. There are even some Republicans that want that to happen, like people like Phil Scott, the governor of Vermont. He's a Republican, but he's certainly not a Trumpite. He's more of a Jeb neocon, and so he viscerally hates Trump and has repeatedly called him names and said he's a terrible person and stuff like that. The top issue, therefore, is SCOTUS, or roughly Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Her croaking right before the election has upended the political paradigm. It will be very interesting indeed to see what happens in the national polling over the subsequent couple of weeks. It will have an effect. Number 2 is coronavirus. Although this is technically a waning issue, and so kind of tied and falling with number 3, which is the riots. Coronavirus remains an issue in the sense that if the epidemic continues to largely fall out of public consciousness, it benefits Trump. If you had a sudden spike in dying of COVID deaths, it would be bad for him. The death rate, despite the fact that the case totals have slowly inclined now for the last month, the death rate is actually continuing to drop. And it looks like the possibility that the virus is mutating and becoming less lethal. This is an evolutionary mechanism that essentially the virus, if it can escape notice, escape any form of treatment, escape any possibility that that person is quarantined, but still be transmissible, evolution favors that. This is the tendency. The quarantine situation actually is an evolutionary driving mechanism. The hope is, of course, that continues. The hope is the virus snuffs itself out by becoming so weak that it no longer transmits or something. Nature can take care of it. Mankind, of course, can't. The riots are a close number 3. Again, in some communities, the rioting has dissipated. In other areas, though, what it's really caused is that right now you've got 5 million additional gun owners in the United States, largely in suburban and in many cases swing state areas. This is going to have a huge outsized impact, I think, on not necessarily the number of people that support Trump or lack of support for Biden, but enthusiasm, turnout. That is, people who would normally be soft supporters of the Republican Party, they're a Trump fan, but they're not really, they don't have a MAGA hat, all of a sudden turn out in large numbers because they are worried. They're voting out of fear against the other side more than, I think, for Trump in many of these cases. As long as the riots keep going, at the very least, independent content creators that are making independent commentary and aren't beholden to the corporate press, at the very least, they're going to have plenty of riot footage to show people. This is a perennial reminder of the failure of blue state, blue city policies. The Democrats have unsuccessfully attempted to use the, well, it's Trump's America thing, because Trump, of course, on the federal level, doesn't control state and local police. Number 4 would be unemployment. This one is very thankfully moving in the right direction. Unemployment has fallen in most states. Now it's well in the single digits and still falling. It spiked up. It was almost 15%. That's a catastrophic unemployment rate. A considerable proportion of it, more than half of those that were let go of, have been rehired. Now, some of the damage, unfortunately, is lasting. We don't know whether it's going to continue to fall even at the rate it is now. My thought is it'll be below 8% nationally in the next and final economic period before the election. For the month of October, I don't know if we're going to get those numbers in, the truly last numbers before the election, because that's right at the beginning of November. I would say this is a great economic indicator, is like for a couple of months there, the Democrats in part were campaigning on the economy's terrible. Wall Street began to recover first. There's a lag, of course, with jobs and some other indicators. Dow and NASDAQ and stuff start to recover, and they say, well, that's not Main Street, it's Wall Street. Well, the problem is that unemployment rate is Main Street. The problem is that when those workers go back to work, outsizedly again, that's a Trump recovery. Do you think that under Obama or Biden, the recovery would have been V-shaped, or do you think because Biden has openly proclaimed he would lock everything down for 3 more months if he's elected, do you think things would crash? He would have crashed the economy. We'd still be on a full lockdown in the United States. The whole world economy would be in a deep recession at bare minimum. Instead, it's now in technically a light recession and quickly rising back out of it. If we re-elect Trump, by the time that 2021 ends, the economy will have recovered to pre-pandemic levels. That's my prediction. I think things will be hunky-dory. I think it'll be morning in America again. If Biden is elected, the economy will collapse. Unemployment is subjugated in part to the coronavirus issue, by the way. That's the reason why coronavirus would be still a main issue, because it's beginning to recede out of the public consciousness, is because of the economic impact. It's really, a lot of it has to do with blue state response at this point more than the virus itself, in the sense of jobs, in the sense of GDP and wages and so forth. And the last issue would be policing. Now, this is semi-separate from the riots. The riots are optically different. You can have a protest of 100,000 people, very meaningful, totally peaceful. They're just, making slogans, holding signs, and asking for police reform or something like that. That's not necessarily connected to the riots. The riots typically are after sundown in areas with Antifa sympathetic AGs, or prosecutors rather, and that's really where those are happening. Elsewhere, it's mostly protests. That's beginning to dissipate too. The fact is that public consciousness is quickly exhausted on major issues. People get bored, even of things that are otherwise fairly exciting, even the riots. Fewer people now are talking about them, even though they're still ongoing. At some point, there's a lack of attention, and if your whole goal is to get attention, which Antifa clearly wants, to justify its own Soros money budget, then the riots usually begin to dry up, or they have to stoke racial fear some other way. They have to point to a different instance of a police-involved shooting. Whether or not it's actually a legitimate shooting, the officer was right to deploy their weapon, doesn't really matter because of the instantaneous news cycle. So those are the 5 base issues, I think, that are, in that order roughly, that are of greatest import. SCOTUS is now the big one. That may be taken back off the table before the election. If Ginsburg is replaced before Election Day, there's no more issue. There might be an issue of the fallout from that decision. Democrats might say, well, look, he's going to stack the court and end abortion. Republicans will say, well, look, the party has let us down. They don't have a replacement or something like that, depending on which way things go. My hope is she gets replaced before the election day. At the very least before inauguration in the lame duck session. Will that happen? I'm not 100% sure. Signs point to probably yes, which is good, but there's always the possibility that the never-Trumpers manage to stymie it. There's at least 2 votes against it from the Republicans. 2 more people need to flip. Romney, of course, is a 50-50 shot. It's basically who offered him more money, I think. And then coronavirus, riots, unemployment, policing, which are kind of all interconnected in some ways. Those are the other big issues. The Democrats are trying to make gun control an issue. That's a terrible idea for them. They should stop it, so I hope they keep going. And the other one is like climate change. They're trying to make it an issue. Well, wildfires are caused by climate change. Hurricane, it's a climate change. This is a perennial issue the Democrats have begun to lose on. And the only real reason that they're bringing it up is because on a lot of these other issues, it favors Trump. If riots are the issue of the day, coronavirus deaths are way down. They're below 1% at this point. Those favor Trump generally. And with the economy moving in the right direction, of course, that's also another thing. That's about all. Peace out.